You are on the rant chair, which is where for $5 I will rant about a topic of your choice. Click the link in the description to request a rant. This one comes from The True Blur, and he asked me to rant about the distinction between richness and depth in the context of games. Is there a distinction, or are they basically just synonyms? Now, when he messaged me about this, I did DM him in advance saying, "Hey, I don't know if I have a real answer for this yet. This is still very much my understanding of those terms is very much in flux still. I'm still developing sort of my theoretical understanding in that regard. So be ready for that, y'all. I don't really know. I'm just a dumb guy. It is I wonder what exactly I said that prompted this question. I forget exactly what content I was making at the time. Cause I I think recently I've been throwing around those words kind of loosely with the understanding that I haven't fully defined them for myself yet. And um I think in that sort of in that vein, I do tend to use them kind of interchangeably to describe a vague sensation, right? To describe games that that are good. Um, so I mean, there's like we have sort of ideas of what those things mean, right? Like so just anthropologically and colloquially, right? When I say that a game is very mechanically rich, there's a lot of obvious implications with that. Okay, maybe there's a lot of things. It's very, it somehow spans a wide scope, right? But then, does that mean, okay, I have a lot of mechanics, or does that mean, okay, this one mechanic, has a lot of nuance, right? One game, obviously, I've been thinking about Crazy Taxi a lot. Crazy Taxi, been on the mind, and in that game, you have such precise control over the angle of your car, for example, when you park, and that shit matters. It matters that I want to be as close to my target direction. I want to be angled as close to my target direction as possible when I park, so that I don't lose time when I get going. And it's sort of this idea, okay, it's this one mechanic, the angle of my car, that has pretty exact nuance, and then it directly relates to this overarching thing, in this case, the timer, right? And the timer is directly important to my success in the game. And I'll say, in my attempts to sort of define depth recently, mechanical depth, um, the idea that things somehow relate to a goal or to success, to your performance, that is important to what I'm looking for, sort of definitionally, right? I um I appreciate, and I've talked about this with a couple other people, my friend Pang, for example. Um, we've had like even sort of in an academic setting, we've had a discussion about it. I've discussed this with one of my lecturers as well. I obviously there's games that um there's I let me back up a little bit. There is this very basic conception of game states. Every every combination of parameters in a game is a state. And then a really common, well, I guess one model. I don't know if Cecilia Wagger is a game designer and blogger and critic that I follow. I've probably mentioned her a couple times here as well. And her original model from like 10 years ago was very much based on the idea of, okay, we want to figure out what are the relevant states. And that's already a little wishy-washy, right? It already privileges the idea as well that, okay, what is relevant? It somehow needs to refer to some kind of conception of a goal or of a meta even. And then the meta of the game can even decide what is relevant or not, right? If we through the meta find out that certain strategies obsolete other strategies, Celia at the time, she would have considered that a loss of depth, right? To me, the idea of states, game states, and like somehow enumerating the states, to me that is literally exact, right? I could exactly count the number of states in a game, right? And even if I have a definition for, okay, this is what I consider meaningful or valuable or whatever or relevant, that gives me a guideline, right? But if I'm saying, okay, this game has 6,000 or 6 million relevant states, and this game has 6 million and a half, does that actually help me in analyzing games? To me, that was always really hard to grasp. So in my own academic work, I've stayed away from that. I've kept it pretty much completely philosophical and a little bit abstract. Which, for some, if you're inclined in a different way, you may think my method is very bad and wishy-washy. The if I'm analyzing games, what I like is to be able to ask, when I look at individual elements, okay, does this raise the depth or not? And how could it raise the game's depth somehow, right? So, I mean, you could imagine a version of Crazy Taxi, and even see now I'm coming up with an example in my head, and I'm already realizing, okay, maybe the word depth is not the right word. And that's also I'm not comfortable really defining it. I'm slowly moving away from it as well. Again, if we're taking Crazy Taxi, imagine if my speed didn't affect my ability to turn, right? If you go at really high speeds in Crazy Taxi, it will lock out the steering wheel and you won't be able to turn as easily. And that is a big component that in what makes the game much more interesting, in my opinion. And I would even say, oh, okay, makes the game richer, right? Because this one factor, the speed that I'm going at, relates to this other factor, which is turning, and then they both relate to my overall goal. And that somehow is like, I don't know if it's depth, I don't know if it's richness, but it's something. And once I have the ability to identify, okay, the game is rich because those two things are related to each other, and then they're related to the goal. I would argue the game would be less the positive quality that I'm looking for, less rich, less interesting, if they weren't related. And then even simpler example might be something like Ghosts and Goblins. That's another game I've been thinking about a lot, where one of the most basic things they allow in that game is they allow enemies to spawn, grounded enemies, zombies. They allow them to spawn at any x-axis position, and randomly, dynamically. And again, if you imagine a version of the game where, okay, the spawns were always the same, it would be much less rich, right? It would be much less interesting, because it does no longer have the potential for different elements to sort of combine in awkward or challenging ways for the player. So that's, again, if we're calling this my method, again, I'm very hesitant to say it that way because it's not a super original thought, in my opinion. But that's how I would sort of approach it, right? I would say, okay, I look at a platformer and I see, oh, the enemies they only spawn at predefined positions. how do I raise the richness of this game? I allow them to spawn anywhere, right? I can, if I have this framework of, okay, I want to give, and this is another word that I used a lot, nuance. I want to give, I guess for me, nuance is the ability for individual elements to scale somehow, right? Um, my instructor that I've mentioned before, she referred to this as float versus integer, which is, if you're programming head, maybe overly simplistic to call it that, but it does make sense, right? Instead of discrete outcomes, you want something that's a little more fluid, right? You want something that's more continuous. Again, like imagine crazy taxi, right? If it had imagine if my car, instead of gradually turning, it just snapped in one of 8 directions. Would be less nuance, right? So the logical thing to do is, I just add states in between. That's nuance. And then that's the one factor, and then you look at, okay, how do things relate to each other? I've mentioned that a lot already. I'm kind of rambling, I'm realizing. I think from that you can tell, okay, this is just a big fucking mess of ideas and thoughts. I think I'm getting close to a model that I'm happy with of, again, game elements relating to each other and creating some kind of sensation. And then somehow that is important to the player. Again, when I was talking to Pang, the word that he used that I liked is a propellant. You have goals, performance evaluation as some kind of propellant. And then there needs to be a way to figure out, okay, how strong does this propellant need to be effective? And how does this affect the player psychologically, and what can fall through the cracks if you design a game this way? Yeah, that's roughly where I'm at right now. I hope this was somehow useful. Thank you.